Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and joining me today is a very familiar guest, my friend Dean Knudson. Dean, how you doing?
Good to be back with you, Jamie.
And I should say Representative Knudson, now finishing your second term, correct?
Just finishing, second term. We wrapped up the session.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, because really keeping in touch with what's going on down in Madison was the impetus for this show when we started 8 years ago. And so that's why we love having you back and your predecessor keeping us informed of what's going down in Madison. So let's start with the last session and kind of refresh for the folks too. We know that those are 2-year terms in the Assembly, but and originally there's some states, in fact, that still do only meet for like 60 or 90 days. And I don't know if it was one of the Dakotas recently had a well-publicized where they went into the early morning hours of Easter. When is it that the legislature's actually in session then?
So in Wisconsin, we have a calendar for the 2-year cycle where in the first year, the odd-numbered year, we do our budget. And we start in January, and we're to have our budget done by statute by the end of June.
Right.
And that is pretty much a session January to June.
So that's your bigger session of the 2-year term?
That's the bulk of the 2-year term. In many states, that would be it for 2 years, but not in Wisconsin.
Not in Wisconsin. You got to come back and more tinkering.
Usually then there's a fall session,
Okay.
which typically is September, October, never later than Thanksgiving typically. But there will be a fall session put on the calendar each year that's got, again, some floor session, committee work, bills go to the floor, and again, that's in the odd year, but it's more limited. And then in the even year, we meet again in January. It's not the budget going on, and that's like this time you saw hundreds of bills go through, and so that tends to be a pretty productive session as far as things other than budgetary items. January, this year we finished up, beginning part of April, the Senate had their final floor session, sent all the bills to the governor, and then the governor week by week has been having signing ceremonies where he did 50 bills a day, 60 bills a day on various subjects, some of which are not, making the news, and some are pretty important.
Well, I want to get into some of those, but it seems like that even number year generally does get wrapped up before May, and then which we're filming this now on April 30th, day after your birthday, by the way. Happy birthday. And but we will have in June the nomination papers get turned in officially, and then the campaign season kind of kicks
starts, right? So the legislature traditionally has not met during that election or campaign season.
Okay.
It would be possible to be called into special session, and there's been some talk about that, but it usually doesn't happen.
And in that extra long session, or the bulk of the work, so to speak, with the budget, many times we see lots of riders get put into the budget bill that don't necessarily have a lot to do with, it's supposed to be connected with dollars and cents. Sometimes ideas introduced, and then some things are taken back out, maybe they're floated as test balloons, and then they show up again in this even number spring term, and that's where we get a lot of the so-called non-budgetary, but it doesn't stop you from dealing with fiscal issues, and you did do that this last term.
Correct, right. I mean, we've done tax reform.
Let's talk about that.
Start
there. I always like to start with the dollars and cents because we're sending our taxes down to Madison. Want to know if any are going to be coming back, or?
Well, everyone wants to see their government be effective, be efficient, to have us use those tax dollars as wisely as possible. You know that we suffered through a recession that we're just now beginning to kind of come out of, and people are starting to feel like things are getting better. But as that recession hit us so hard, our tax revenues for the state were hit quite hard. At the same time, our expenses were going up. So we had, in 2011, we dealt with a $3 billion budget deficit. Made some changes, reformed government in the way that we deliver services so that it can be done at a lower cost, and the economy began to pick up. More people working, more income and more income tax, more sales tax being collected because people are buying more again. And as that happened, things started to look good. We actually, this year we came in, we had a surplus. So as we did the budget, we did some tax reform. We lowered income tax rates for everyone. We made a reduction to the tax bracket, not the top bracket, but the middle brackets were lowered, and the bottom bracket was lowered. And then
So
now
income tax relief.
income tax release, pretty substantial. So in the session before this one, we did $1 billion of tax relief for middle class taxpayers. In this session, we've done another $1 billion of tax relief. That means we dealt with that $3 billion deficit, balanced up our budget, and then as things are improving now, we've collected more tax revenue, we can pay our bills, and we also are letting the taxpayers, it's their money, we're giving it back to them. So we did property tax relief as well this time. And property tax is one of the more visible and unpopular taxes there is. And it's been a stubborn problem, but we'll actually, in the aggregate statewide, property taxes will be lower this year than they were 4 years ago, and that's an accomplishment because through all kinds of administrations and through all kinds of economies, property taxes have been on a pretty relentless upward climb.
Fairly steady.
Pretty steady. So, I mean, that a family that's hurting, and whether they've lost the job in their family or not, they probably didn't see big increases in their take-home pay during this recession. And for some, they've really struggled because they had job loss or dislocations. You know, the things that hit their bottom line are things like the cost of college tuition. And we also found this time that, you know, with the changes that have been made, the university system actually started developing a surplus as well. And so we froze college tuition for 2 years, and I hope we'll extend that. The governor's announced he'd like to see that extended
I
another
wanted to talk
2.
about that. I've got kids in the UW system, as have you in the past, and so we really appreciate not seeing tuition go up between 2012 and 2013, and so that's going to go into effect again for another.
Well, that will be
14-15.
in the budget. I mean, that the regions set the tuition and make that decision, but the legislature and the governor will give them their budget and give them direction. And what we did this time was we said there will be a freeze. So we'll be having that discussion with them. I mean, the key points there, hey, you know, you're a parent. My youngest is graduating now. In 18 days, he'll get a diploma and join the working world. But, you know, so the last 7-8 years, our family's been paying tuition. Right. For my daughter, who finished at Madison a few years ago, from her first year to her fourth year, tuition went up about 50%.
Okay.
So wow. That's a lot. And, you know, families just get really crushed by the burden of that. The student loan debt gets to be a real issue for families. And so it's a concern. We hear from constituents about it all the time, and the question is, what can you do? Well, this time we did a freeze. That tuition won't go up at any of our UW campuses.
Well, so maybe not all families are in our situation. We're having college-age kids, although that's a real, I mean, 10% of tuition, that runs about $500 right there per semester, and when you go out over 4 semesters, which would be the 2-year period, you're talking thousands of dollars savings for one family.
And I mean, to look at it at a bigger level, that tuition increase raised about $40 million for the UW system each time they did that. So it'd be $40 million a year. Now that's a lot of money, right? And you say, how can they do without having their annual increase? Well, with the changes that we had made and with what had been happening, they developed a surplus of over $1 billion of extra money that they had there that hadn't been spent. In some cases, it has a designated purpose, but in other cases, it was completely undesignated. And from the time we found that, it was about $1 billion. Next thing we knew, it had grown to $1.2 billion. And the next thing it was up to $1.3 billion, and the university system was accumulating money. at a time when families are really hurting, and it had these huge increases, and we just said, hey, I think you can do without a tuition increase for right now. It won't be forever, because the day will come when tuition will go up again. But
Well, so we've got those savings. How much of that $1 billion for the income tax, let's say, would be in a typical, your average family? I don't know if the average in Wisconsin makes about $47,000. I think it's the average income per household. But what does that translate to as far as tax dollars?
it's a pretty small amount.
Okay.
You spread that out over all the income taxpayers. For example, someone that's at the lowest tax bracket, and where it had been at 4.4%, now it's going to go down to around 4%. So you've got a tenth, about 0.5%
Okay.
on their income. That's not a huge amount of money.
Okay, so I'll take the flip side of that is, if it's not a big amount of money, why not just put that in a rainy day fund for the state so that we don't come and face $3 billion deficits like we did back in 2011?
That's a good question. And we did do that. And we've contributed to the rainy day fund each of these last 4 years now. It's at the highest level it has ever been. And that happens when there's surplus, because the way the law reads is that when you end a term, or at the end of each biennium, whatever is left that's surplus, at least half of that has to go into the rainy day fund.
Okay.
And we do expect to end in surplus and make another large contribution to it, and I think that's good. Frankly, it would have been a little bit larger, but there were people that were concerned about that, and they wanted to see it handled differently, and so it got into
Well, people wanted
politics.
the earmarks for different things.
Well, there's that, but people had concern over what they call the structural deficit,
Okay.
which is a way of accounting that under that strange accounting system, if you had money in your savings account, it counts as money that's been spent. Well, the rainy day fund is our savings account.
Right.
So by putting it in there, it counted as money spent. If you kept it in your checking account, where it's available to be spent at any time by the first person who
Right.
can get enough votes to spend it, then it doesn't count as money spent, and so it makes your structural deficit look better.
Right.
It's really a misuse of the whole concept of structural deficit in my book. And if it had been up to me, we'd have put more into the rainy day fund, but that's the way it went down.
So there's a
there
balance there.
There's a balancing, and you have a lot of different opinions on things, and some people would have liked to have spent it, and we did. We spent some. For example, we made an additional investment in through our technical colleges for job training.
Right.
For certain high demand fields, and we took $35 million and said, here, fund training.
Which happens to be where the demand is anyway. For employers are going to the technical schools and getting some of those skilled workers.
Certain fields, welding, for example, is in
That was the
very
one I was
high
gonna use.
demand. Here in St. Croix County, we've got a company, OEM, that's got 3 different locations in Wisconsin now, but their headquarters is out in Woodville, and they've got 250 employees or so, most of who have a 2-year technical college type degree. Their average W-2 is $50,000 a year, average over all those employees, and that includes some
Right.
people that don't have a technical college degree. So it's pretty good jobs available in that. We need to recognize that not everyone needs to have a 4-year degree.
Right.
There are a lot in the new economy. There are going to be a lot of technical positions where you maybe don't need a 4-year degree.
Plus, there's some of those 4 years degrees that will end up, the student will be $80,000 in debt and maybe not have the skills that are necessarily job ready, or have to go on for even more schooling and more debt.
Right. When I went to the legislature, and the reason I originally ran was I care about protecting the taxpayer, and that's really what drives me. So you see me talking a lot about taxes and let's keep spending under control.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, broken record. But I care deeply about education, and I care deeply about the University of Wisconsin higher education, both our UW system and our 4-year colleges, and the two-year colleges, the technical colleges, and I've worked on that from the time I went to Madison. We need to have a world-class university system. We've got it. We need to protect that and continue to have that grow. We've got a place in Wisconsin for every student to find a niche that fits them. You know, whether it is for that two-year degree, whether it's going to UW River Falls where they have great programming in not just agriculture, but you know, they're doing high-tech science there, and they're gonna start having some engineering classes there, I think. Or if it's UW-Madison, which is just a premier research, world-class research institution that is a driver of our state economy by helping with technologies in, you know, the biomedical fields, and you know, we're seeing spin-offs into kind of the life sciences.
So, and
Tremendous.
let's talk about that manufacturing credit, which I know is continuing. We're into the second phase of that, or just had experienced that, and so we're seeing that effect in the budget, but as it grows the economy. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So what we did back in 2011 was we instituted a manufacturing tax credit. Now, Wisconsin's been traditionally a manufacturing state, lots and lots of jobs in manufacturing, and frankly, we've had a little bit of a structural, I don't know if that's the right term, but we've had a challenge transitioning from kind of old economy jobs to new economy jobs. And you'll see that when we're compared to Minnesota, Minnesota has been more nimble. Some of this goes back to, you know, back in the 60s when pacemakers and medical devices, I mean, they became
they were a leader in that field.
Leader, and they still are. And that doesn't change, it just grows. You know, one company sort of wants to be by another company, and there's a synergy. And you know, we've had lots of manufacturing that's been more subject to the kind of thing where the company decides, boy, we're going to have this go to a lower wage place in the country or a lower cost place in the country. We've really got to get to where we've got brain power jobs and high-tech jobs, and we're doing that, but it takes a while. So we want to support manufacturing. We put on a manufacturing tax credit. No longer are we going to have a company that moves to Texas because of the tax climate in Texas, because there's no reason for them to do that. You know, we're going to have
or South Dakota.
South Dakota. So you take, for example, we've got kind of a burgeoning aircraft industry here in the state of Wisconsin, and one is up in New Richmond area. It's called EPS. And they're making a high-tech diesel engine that I think will revolutionize small aircraft power plants. And they've gradually going through the FAA approval process. They're going to have a prototype flying soon. They've got the military wants to buy this to put in things like drones and other places. It's lighter. It burns on a less costly fuel that's more available and is less finicky, and it's going to be great. So you take them, and they get that thing to market. Now they have to decide, well, we're going to hire, they may hire as many as 200 engineers, let alone the people in the plant that are building the thing. And now they'll make a decision, okay, where are we going to do that plant? We want them to do it in Wisconsin.
So you'll offer them this manufacturer's credit.
Everybody gets it. It's not targeted. It's not so everybody gets it.
That's what I wanted to clarify. It's not just for new ones. Let's if we could turn back the clock and GM still had its plant in Janesville, would this manufacturing credit, would GM have enjoyed that?
Absolutely.
If they not closed the place?
Absolutely, they would have.
Okay.
Yep. It's absolutely a way for us to try to fight. You know, you saw it with. You know, you've seen a variety of manufacturers from Polaris, you know, closing. Right. Now they've got something going up there again, but up in Osceola, they were going to send those jobs elsewhere. One after another, we saw these people saying, we're going to leave Wisconsin. Well, we need to make our tax climate and our overall economic climate one where they've got great workers here that are smart, well-trained, dependable, all that Midwest work ethic that we've got, that turn out the best product they could, and that they're going to make more money then. Because for them, it's about profit, and we want them to make that profit here.
Okay, I'll have to ask this because they say, well, when you're giving credits like that to manufacturers, aren't you just shifting the burden then to families and to those people paying income and residential property tax?
It's a calculated policy decision that we need the jobs, that we're going to lose them, and if they move, we don't have anything from them. We don't have the jobs or any cut from the income.
Okay.
So let's be competitive in that way, and let's try to have the jobs.
I know we have some non-fiscal issues that we want to talk about that are targeted, primarily locally here. But as a transition to that, we talk about, you said you want to stand up for the Wisconsin taxpayer. Where are we at on the tax reciprocity? I know that this has been a sore spot for several years now, and part of that issue was Minnesota was upset, I think, with our previous administration saying you haven't paid us the taxes that are due us or whatever, and so we're going to just end this tax reciprocity. And as a result, we've had a lot of folks who live here in St. Croix County happen to have at least part of their occupations or vocations earning their money over in Minnesota. We have 2 in our family, and it's a big headache to file both Minnesota and Wisconsin state taxes. And we're filming this at the end of April. A lot of them have gotten all their taxes filed. And what can you report on the status of that?
There's nothing encouraging or promising to report at all. No, as a politician, I can tell you if I could spin that into some positive answer, I would, but all I can do is just be straight with you. That whole thing is, I believe, just dead in the water, and it's a crying shame. There's a group of us that are on a bipartisan basis on both sides, legislators from Wisconsin, both parties, and from Minnesota, both parties. We've worked on it. The original ask, the reason that it broke down and what Minnesota wanted was pay us on time, which hadn't been happening, and they wanted to see a new study, an incidence study, which has now happened. And we did all the things that they originally wanted.
So you've been paying them on time and did the incident study, so now it should be moving forward then.
Yeah. So they asked for one more thing at the very end, and it's something that Wisconsin just can't do. It wouldn't be good for our people, and I think it'll never happen. And the tax commissioner in Minnesota is Myron Franz, and this is very important to him. And I think it'd be safe to say that as long as he's the tax commissioner, we will not have reciprocity again, because he's really been stuck on this issue. And basically,
Well, it better be good.
well, here's what it is. They found that when reciprocity ended, they collected more income tax from their own state of Wisconsin residents than they did before, and they liked that. Now, they had never had a reciprocity agreement end before. They have reciprocity with North Dakota, they have reciprocity with Michigan. What they came up with at the end was they said, look, we want you to make us whole for any taxes that we lose if we go back to reciprocity again. Well, we have never done that in the whole 40 years. We've never done that with any other state that we have reciprocity agreements, nor has Minnesota asked that of any of the states that they have reciprocity agreements. It's a totally new ask that is so unreasonable as to be kind of a non-starter. So when you're in a negotiation with someone and everything is going well, we basically acquiesce to every one of their asks. And then we come to the end and they're ready to do a deal, and then they say, oh, and we need this one more thing, which is something that we can't do. If we were to do it, it would cost maybe $20 million for the state of Wisconsin out of the state budget to make the payment, but it also would end up costing people that live in Wisconsin and work in Minnesota, would end up costing them more. For many of them, probably most of them, it might cost more to do that deal than it does to file that extra tax. So it's hard. And we have a reciprocity agreement with Illinois, and they don't ask that of us. If we do that for Minnesota, Illinois will soon ask it, and the estimate is that would cost $100 million to do it down there.
Well, it's more to do with the tax commissioner than it does the fact that Democrats control the governor's mansion in both houses in Minnesota, and Republicans control everything in Wisconsin?
Well, and I couldn't really say that. Our Secretary Chandler of the Department of Revenue in Wisconsin explains this in a much shorter way. He says we give full credit for taxes paid to other states. Minnesota doesn't.
Okay.
We have a taxpayer-friendly approach to doing reciprocity. They have a treasury-friendly approach to doing reciprocity, and they want to continue to do that. And in order to continue to do it, they want Wisconsin taxpayers to now pay more. And the worst of it is every time they raise taxes over there, we'd end up paying them even a little bit more because they'd be foregoing
So they're
a
not
little
just
bit
raising
more.
taxes on their Minnesota residents and voters, they're raising taxes on Wisconsin residents.
Every time they voted a tax increase over there, they'd be voting a tax increase on Wisconsin.
Well, that's the
too.
whole reason we had the Tea Party back in Boston, right?
Well,
Taxation without representation.
As I say, that's pretty much a non-starter.
Okay.
And, you know, unfortunately, I tell you what, I have no higher priority. And I've also had that as my bitterest disappointment in my time in Madison and representing people here, where it affects as many people in my district as any district. I talk with my colleagues about it all the time, but we are just
Well, I
pretty much
appreciate
stuck.
I appreciate your honesty and just saying it like it is on that issue. But if we didn't touch on it and just glossed over it, people would say, "Well, why aren't they talking about that?" But it is something that you'd love to talk more about and see some progress on. It's just one person can't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go from biggest frustration then to some recent successes then. We had some bill signing ceremonies here locally, but I wanted to talk about the heroin bills and dealing with that crisis, and then frac sand. So
Yeah.
Whichever one first you want to talk about.
Well, heroin's been a big problem. It's a growing problem across the state in pockets, and the pockets aren't urban. They are often rural or small towns. And in St. Croix County, we've been hit particularly hard by the tragic deaths of often and typically younger people that become addicted to heroin and then they overdose. And it's not going to be solved easily. No one would say that these bills solve that problem, but they are a step in the right direction in a couple of ways. One, we know that there's a gateway that goes usually from prescription painkillers like OxyContin to then becoming addicted to those, to then your doctor says no more, you don't need them anymore, but there's still the addiction. And so you begin to buy them on the black market. But that's very expensive. And it can be, $60 to $100 a hit, if you will, in the vernacular. And then someday there isn't the money to pay for that. And so the same dealer or pusher that's selling you the illegal OxyContin says, hey, you can get the same high or even better with heroin, and it costs a lot less. It might be $10 or $15. And so there you go. Now you can only use heroin for most people a few times before you're going to be addicted, and it leads to a cycle.
So how do they address that gateway?
So we're going to require a photo ID when you pick up a prescription for opiates, which there's been a problem with prescription fraud.
Okay.
And so you've got somebody else's prescription, and then you'd think that you have to show ID for that, but you didn't have to until now. So that's important to try to get at that front end. We're working hard to try to educate people that the leftover pain meds that you have in your cabinet can easily fall into the wrong hands. That kids know how valuable they are on the black market, and they end up thinking they can experiment with them, and they get into this cycle. When an overdose happens, there's a reversal agent called Narcan that's an antidote. And so when a first responder gets to the scene of an overdose, the sooner they can administer that Narcan, it can
Greater chance of survival.
save the life, hugely greater chance of survival. And what we did is we loosened up our very tight requirements on who could have that Narcan with them, so that now many, many more first responders will have Narcan and be authorized to use it. And then
the person that calls 911 when they see somebody overdose,
right,
there was a bill that protected their potential.
limited immunity.
Okay, limited.
So if you're a person that's there on the scene and you're the one who calls and you stay, and you're trying to render aid, you've realized that something very bad and life-threatening is happening, you're going to stay, that there's limited immunity in that case. The problem that happens, this package of bills was introduced by Representative John Nygren from Marinette. So just diametrically across the state from here, up north of Green Bay, and small town on the border with Michigan, just like we're on the border with Minnesota. The heroin comes in from Michigan because they have completely different laws, and so that's been their thing. It comes up from Chicago, and there's a little pocket there. His daughter almost died, and what happened was somebody called him, but by the time he got to the scene, they had all left. And this is very common. Lots of parents will tell you this, that they may stay there and make an anonymous
because
call.
they're all afraid of getting into trouble.
They're afraid of prosecution, and you'd think this is common sense. But you'll see that they tried to do the same thing over in Minnesota, and I think maybe they did get it through, but there were people that were saying, well, that's soft on crime. Why would you want to give anyone involved with this illicit, illegal activity, why would you want to give anyone a break? Well, the fact of it is that there are no instances of you actually prosecuting or breaking the whole crime cycle by prosecuting someone who was at the scene. You can't point to that. So the prosecution doesn't happen, and the damage is already done.
Right.
But as long as there's this perception that if I stay, I'm busted, serious consequences, just being here might get me a felony, then people tend to leave. And then whatever aid, trying to just do basic CPR or keep the airway open and things like that. I mean, users of heroin all know that it is possible to OD, and they have a basic idea of what's going to go on. And both the fact of that they may not want to be there when the police come or the EMTs come. We want someone to stay there, and we want to have fewer overdose deaths. That's what this is about.
Right. This is about reducing the deaths, and eventually addressing the addiction problem. I know treatment is another issue. You mentioned the representative. I think he came to our high school here, and there was a program that you kind of made invites and got people talking, and the Hudson Community Foundation I know has been following up with that as well. But it was tough as a father to hear him speaking about his own daughter, but for him to drive all the way across the state, literally just to come to our 2-hour forum, that meant a lot.
Treatment is really the answer. I mean, if you say, well, how do you really get at the root problem here? We've got to break that cycle of how you get started. That prescription drug or medication leads to heroin. There is a way to break that, and we're working on that. But ultimately, once the individual is addicted, then you don't solve that problem by putting them in prison. I mean, there's got to be effective treatment. And we really feel like treatment and alternatives to sentencing, or alternatives to incarceration, I should say. They may be sentenced, but then there's a diversion program. Those treatment and diversion programs require funding. Drug courts are being popular and having a lot of success. We doubled the money, the state money going into them this year. I hope we double it again next time.
Right. Well, they've got the studies to support that.
They do.
The increases in the investment in the treatment saves you tens of dollars for every dollar you spend. There is tens of dollars on the incarceration side. So, anything more on the drug?
Well, and our challenge here is we don't have locally in western Wisconsin. We don't have as many treatment.
Everyone has to go over to Eau Claire or further.
Right, and so I think a push to try to help foster the development of more treatment alternatives is one thing. Another is there are new, just like Narcan is used in an emergency situation, there are some new long-acting injectable, I'm trying to think of the term, but I mean,
Not antidote,
I
but
know
something.
the medical term, but
Okay.
it's an antagonist.
Okay.
So it's an antagonist drug, so it basically counteracts. So once you've had that for a week, it wouldn't matter if you took heroin, you're not going to get any high from it, right?
Okay.
So there are some new drugs out there, pretty expensive, but I mean, I think there's some new, what I would call medication-assisted treatment that seems to show a lot of promise, and I think we need to look into all those kinds of things. It's scary. We're about the same age.
Right.
You know, we're from
1
a
year and 6 days
generation where you
apart,
think
yeah.
a smart young kid coming out of high school, they would know better than to get involved with heroin, right? That's a thing of the past. With OxyContin came this whole new pathway that got people started.
Well, and from my understanding is the huge increase in the the prescription medication as well. That's the first thing doctors, and I see a lot of medical records in my field, being injury litigation, and sometimes these people are doctor shopping and they're going and getting more. They say it still hurts. I need more pain meds.
Right.
And then they go to another doctor and say the same thing before they get the other one. I know that there's been some advances made too, so that they talk to each other with the paperless medical records. It's helped a little bit in that regard.
Well, we were a slow state to adopt that. We only adopted a prescription drug monitoring program in Wisconsin. It just really went into effect this last year.
Okay.
So we're coming up on sort of the 1-year anniversary now of having that. And we were the 46th state to do it, something like that. And this will be where, for things like OxyContin, that there's a central database so that, you know, you take an individual who, yes, they know exactly what to say to the doctor.
Right.
And they may actually have, you know, a
Maybe
broken
originally-
arm like you. With your broken arm, Jamie, with that broken arm, you know, you could walk into almost any emergency and say, I'm here,
Right.
emergency room in the state of Wisconsin before this year, and have walked out of there with a new prescription for pain meds because obviously you have something that's painful. Now, what they could not track, they had absolutely no means of tracking,
Right.
was did you just leave Hudson? Were you in New Richmond? Were you then in Cumberland? And were you in Superior? And you were in all those pharmacies or doctor's offices in the same day. Now we can track that, and that will help. But we were slow to get there on that in Wisconsin.
Okay. Last subject, because I know that your time is valuable, but the frac sand issue, which it depends on the community you're in. We don't hear as much over in western St. Croix County, but I know it's huge in eastern St. Croix County and down in Pierce County and other pockets. Some places frac sand mining has been praised as the big job giver. I know that it's going on a lot out in the Dakotas. And other places, it's really ruining the quality of life for the people that have lived there. So.
Well, I don't know if I'd say ruining, but it can have an effect. And because it can have neighborhood effects in the area, I think it's really critical that we have local control, where local residents and their local representatives have the largest say in regulating it and saying, where will it happen, what will happen, those kinds of things. In my assembly district, which is, you know, the city and town of River Falls, and then the western part of St. Croix County, so Roberts, Hudson, Holton.
Right.
No, we don't have active frac sand, although the town of Kinnickinnick has got some activity, and just last night they were having a meeting. They've had a moratorium on. Town of River Falls has had a moratorium on because there's high quality sand under lots of places.
Right.
Even right here in the city of Hudson, there would be high enough quality sand that you could probably see demand to have sand mining. When I ran for election in 2010, this issue rarely came up. In 2012, when we had a candidate forum, probably half of it was on frac sand questions. And at the time, my position was, I think it should be local control. A lot of the people that sought to see greater regulation wanted the state to get involved in doing that regulation. What happened in this last session was you had members of my own party who proposed largely deregulating sand mining and having almost no local control over sand mining, and
So the
instead
other end of the
having
spectrum, yeah.
everything. And so having it done by the state, but having very little local control in that scheme led to a loss of potentially the locals having a say over things like lighting and noise and blasting and traffic and road impacts. And so I took a pretty strong stand on this, even though my direct constituents, the 55,000 people that I represent, may not currently be impacted. But at any time, someone in a rural subdivision can find out that, you know what, the cornfield across the road from me was just sold, and now there's going to be a sand mine there. And as mayor, we have an active quarry right in Knudson. If you go from the dog track property and you go directly to the east, there's a hill and a ravine, and then it drops down about 50 feet down into an active quarry there that most people that live in Knudson aren't even aware that that's there. And they use dynamite and do active blasting, and they worked well with the local officials. When I first heard that they were suggesting that the locals would have little control over things like the use of dynamite and lighting and noise and so on, I said, no. Because of my background in local government, that I stood up against people in my party. And frankly, I'm not very popular with the sand mining industry over that. And I think they'll be back to try again, but we stopped that, I think it was ill-advised legislation in this session. Okay. It's an important industry. The sand that we have is perfect, and that new technology of hydraulic fracturing for uncovering natural gas and oil, particularly out in North Dakota, has just revolutionized the whole oil and gas industry. Our domestic oil production has gone up. We have huge reserves that can be tapped, and sand mining is good for our state. There's good jobs there. We need those jobs. We want to have an active, thriving sand mining industry, but it can be done and still be environmentally safe.
Well, and that's going to be
and have them be good neighbors.
Well, and that's, I think, what most people would consider, the bottom line is finding that balance between.
There's a risk of the water being negatively impacted, and that happened. And you know how precious the St. Croix River is to us here in the valley area.
Right.
And up to the north, up in the Grantsburg area, they had a sand mine facility where a holding dam that had a big dike around it that held sludgy, dirty water to sit there and settle out, except the dike broke and it released that dirty water into a tributary of the St. Croix River. So it does matter to people that live in St. Croix County. We need to do this, and we need to do it. We can do it, we should do it, but we need to do it right. And the water quality has to be protected. There's a lot of concerns about air quality, and some of them might be overblown. But I think it's a legitimate concern in Glenwood City. There's a proposal, and I think they will build a sand mine right across, about a quarter mile away from an elementary school. It would be very similar to if the big empty field that's just down the road from, say, Rivercrest Elementary here in Hudson, and suddenly there was going to be a big industrial sand mining operation there. You'd be concerned. So when you ask me, is there any of this in St. Croix County? That's exactly the situation that Glenwood City is dealing with right now, right near their school. And so it's a concern. It's interesting when you get into politics, and I'm a state representative. I go there to represent these 55,000 people in this area, but I represent the whole state. And we have to stand up for Western Wisconsin when we're in Madison, because otherwise they ignore us.
Right.
They'll ignore us. And this is a Western Wisconsin problem. The legislators that brought up the bill for this, they didn't have any Western Wisconsin legislators on that bill. And the reason why is that they're going to try to do it for us instead of involving us.
Right.
And that's not how it should work, but that's happened a lot.
Okay, let me see if, how does this translate? Because what I'm thinking of, I've got relatives that live closer to Crandon and that area. And do you see the similar principles, and would you see representatives from that area kind of combining with you and other Western Wisconsin to keep the same principle? I mean, if they were to help you stand up for your constituents, are you, do the same principles transfer as to whether or not?
Here's what's unique about sand, is that because of the glacial period and what's under there, you know, you can talk about the iron mine or the Crandon mine.
Yeah, I was talking about the iron mine, right.
Was non-metallic mining, but I mean, then you got the you know, the iron mine up in Forest County. But with sand, literally almost anywhere in western Wisconsin, there could be a sand mine pop up. Just could become your neighbor. And so it's a broad concern. And I think we'll undoubtedly be working on it. I mean, there's room for state legislation there. The problem was this time there didn't seem to be any room for compromise, so the only thing that I could do was find people to help me kill it, which is what we did.
Okay.
And next time I think we'll come back and we'll see if we can't come up with something that, you know, helps locals take care of the road impacts that are happening. I think there's some ways that we could do that. Environmental concerns, I think there's some common sense, science-based ways that we could do new regulations on air quality involved with it. But it's going to take a more thoughtful approach than what we saw this time.
All right. With that, we'll end this session and look forward to seeing you and closer to November, and then look forward rather than look back. But thank you for your work.
Things are going better in Wisconsin.
All right. And with that, a positive note, we'll say goodbye to our viewers. Thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal, and join us again next month. Thanks.